Thank you so much, Joe. I've been introduced. I'm really excited to be here and speak to you about AI and Maritime. So welcome to BT Tower. Hopefully you'll get to go upstairs at some point. And I'm really excited to host a panel just after my presentation. So yeah, lots of great speakers to hear from. So I'm going to be talking much more about AI and what we're doing at BT and drawing some parallels and similarities with what I think is needed in the maritime industry. I don't have a maritime background, so I'm here in listening mode, but I'll draw some parallels because generally when we talk about AI, you find that most companies, most organizations, broadly speaking, face very similar challenges. They feel different and they feel special, I think, in many areas, but broadly speaking, they're pretty similar wherever you look. I unfortunately cannot stay for the rest of the day, but I'm on LinkedIn and Brian knows where to find me if you do have any questions. I'll also be talking about what the most recent developments in AI possibly mean, both for BT and Maritime as well. I'm excited to kind of hear your thoughts in the panel session. So, quite wordy slides, so apologies, but AI is not new to BT. We have huge amounts of data, as you can imagine, as we run vast networks, and we're looking to even gather even more data through 5G, as we'll come to in a bit. So with all this, you won't be surprised to know that we've been using AI for some time, for decades actually. Back in the 90s, we were using it, the first European telco to use it for workforce scheduling. And since then, we have been continuing to research and develop AI and apply it to our own work. So, for example, according to our strategy, we're looking to make sure we build the strongest foundations. We look to create those standout, really positive customer experiences. And we're also looking to the future to make sure we've got that sustainability. So just some examples of how we're using AI currently in these areas. The first one is around security, and I know that is also something of great importance to the maritime industry. So we're using it and have been using AI for some time to be able to detect and identify threats to our networks and to resolve those before they actually create any issues. So the kinds of things kind of questions we're asking of the AI in the course of doing that is how can I identify, how can I characterize threats as they come in? How can I see emerging new threats as they are developing? And that's really important, I think, now more than ever. And how can I, given the likelihood of threats, how can I optimize my network to try and make it harder for those threats to emerge? So an example of where we're using AI is to be able to predict, for example, network outages. So can we look at the data coming in from routers and other network devices to understand when one may be about to go pop or maybe degrading in performance? And that will obviously hinder a customer's network. Can we predict that's about to happen and fix it before it does and causes a problem? And you can imagine looking to the future, using more AI, this could lead us to have kind of self-healing, self-fixing networks that can just get on with it themselves. In the second area, the kind of questions we're asking about, what is it my customer wants? Is this customer looking for a new service? Are we fulfilling their needs? So we do a lot with AI in this space, for things like churn prediction, for example, lots around personalization. So can we identify from a customer's behavior what kind of situation they're in, what their needs might be at this time? So one example here is around actually can we go beyond that and look at providing tools and services that suit customers given their particular situation. So health is obviously a huge market and a huge need for society. Here we've been looking at what we call healthcare at home. So can we use AI to automatically predict or spot when someone's potentially about to have a fall or when they're acting in a way that looks outside of normal for them? Can we then use that information to highlight or alert someone close to them to come and sort that out? So here what we've been very mindful of is privacy. So incredibly mindful of that. We use the AI, so we extract from the videos stick people effectively. So you cannot identify a person from that. The data doesn't leave the home. And from those stick people, we can use computer vision techniques to understand anomalies, understand what normal means, and therefore take action as appropriate. So there we're kind of making sure that we are respecting the privacy when we do that, but providing a service that means something to someone. And of course, in the future, as we are seeing more 5G rollout, we're seeing more Internet of Things, and we're seeing that in the maritime space as well. What other new products and services could we provide to our customers in collaboration or separately to meet their needs as they change over time? Whether there's a pandemic or whether things just naturally change over time in terms of how people are moving around, what new products and services can we develop using AI going forward? And thirdly, that's kind of looking to the future, making sure things are sustainable. Like all industries, we're looking to make sure we optimize our own operations. Kind of questions, how can we generate marketing collateral much faster? How can we generate and check contracts much faster? How can we have software developers generate code much faster? We're piloting AI technology in that space, like many companies are. So here we're looking to push the boundaries of AI to see what we can do to make all our lives easier and a lot more productive, and I'll touch on that a bit later. So as an example of this is where you see engineers out in the street laying cables, etc., fibre, having the ability using AI to take a photo of an installation and have that automatically checked for any issues. So those can be resolved before anyone leaves the site. So that's something that's now in place. And then looking to the future, you can imagine that that will help us with further automation where appropriate to make sure we've got the highest quality installations possible. And of course, in the maritime industry, that has many, many applications, and we'll hear more about those a bit later, I'm sure. So that's kind of, we've been using AI for a long time, many people have, but what now? And I think many people, I'm sure in this room, will know about generative AI, but broadly speaking, this is kind of the latest set of developments in AI, which means we can not only predict patterns or see patterns in data, but we can also generate new forms of content. So that can be in the form of text, images, video, software code, as I mentioned before, all sorts of things. So now, no one needs to start with a blank sheet of paper. You can say, write me a policy on X, or compose me an email to so-and-so, and that can be generated for you. The quality of that, is down to the technology and down to how you frame your question. But now we've got the ability to make sure that people can generate this stuff. There are pros and cons to that, and we'll come to that a bit later. But so, for example, it can generate code, and I said we're piloting that within BT. Many companies are. So it can make suggestions of code fragments. So it's a bit like, rather than using Stack Overflow and doing a bit of a search on that, actually have the machine suggest the next bit of code to you. Luckily, we have a human in the loop already. We do code reviews, so that can be checked. But we're starting to see increases in productivity through that tool. We're also, people are using it, not us necessarily, but using it to generate pictures of things that are quite novel. So this kind of thing can be used for marketing. So we've got one here on the left-hand side, which is the face of a person who does not exist in actual fact. You wouldn't know it, it's that high quality, but that face does not exist in reality. And then you can do very surreal things with teddy bears and steampunk, etc. So, thinking about the ways we might be able to use this within our own business and for our customers, personalizing adverts to customers. We've seen Kevin Bacon on the EE adverts. What if we all had our own Kevin Bacon, our own avatar or some form that spoke to us about our own needs and about what products and services are available to us? Now, just to be clear, the generative AI approaches like ChatGPT and others are just another tool in the AI toolkit. We still use a wide range of AI techniques, and we will continue to do so because they're very complementary. What does this mean for expectations on demand side? So people who are engaging with organisations in the maritime industry, with BT, with others, what does that mean? I think it means several things. I do think there is going to be a shift in people's expectations of what companies will do to respond to them. I think firstly, they would expect much more personalisation. As I mentioned before, the kind of personalised Kevin Bacon or whoever, having something that is literally developed based on data about how your previous purchases, your previous searches, etc., being able to personalise something, the way it looks and feels, the way it speaks to you, I think there will be much higher expectations on what that looks like going forward. The second area is around the Ask Me Anything. I think many of us are used to engaging, whether we like it or not, with chatbots, whether that's with a bank or insurance company, for example. And I think generally people understand that they're pretty okay in a very confined space. They're okay at a very specific task, set out in a very well-structured way. But now, with things like ChatGPT and very similar tools, you can ask anything you want really in natural language, and something comes back to you. Again, whether that something is accurate or whether it's useful or not is another question, but something can come back to you again in the form of natural language or an image or a video, etc. So there's going to be much more expectation that I'm not going to be having to talk to a chatbot that can only talk about one thing. I'm going to be able to call up a company and ask about all sorts of things. So whether that's a shipping company or other company within the maritime industry, I think there'll be much more expectations around engagement and what that looks like. The third area is what we call total recall. So again, when you call up an organisation and actually speak to a person, quite often you find you have to reiterate why you're calling and your backstory, etc. I think there's going to be much more expectation that that person on the other end of the phone is going to have a complete history summarised in the right form for them of potentially why you're calling or where you've called before and what that was about. So much more expectation that when I speak to someone, they are going to know my context. They're going to know why I'm likely to be calling. And again, that's going to change the kind of interaction we might be seeing going forward. And then the fourth one is much more about colleagues and the colleague experience. So I don't know whether it's just BT, but other organisations I've been at. But if I've got an HR question, I need to go to an HR system to ask that question. If I've got a finance question, I go to a finance system, etc. Wouldn't it be great if I could just ask my question in natural language in one prompt bar, like a Google search bar, and then I get the information I want coming back to me? I don't need to care which system it comes from. It just comes back. So I think we're likely to see more what we call headless apps, where you've got these databases and actually you just ask your question in natural language and what comes back is derived from all those systems. And I think for many people that would be a lot easier to work with. So I think my general point here is we are going to see a lot of changing expectations on all organisations because of developments in this technology. I get asked a lot, I'm sure you all do, about when's this going to happen? When are we going to be changing everything? And I think this goes back to I think it's a Bill Gates quote. We tend to overestimate the speed of progress in 2 years, but underestimate the speed, the progress in a decade. And I think it's similar here. I think there's still some things we need to work on with the technology, and we'll be talking about what that means for adoption during the panel. So lots of people talk about this we're on the edge of an AI revolution. AI is going to change the way we operate and do everything. And I said there will be some changes, but I think they'll be slower at first than we think, and then things may change more markedly 2 years plus. I actually think we're actually at a tipping point of a people plus AI revolution. This technology is nothing, firstly, without data, but it's certainly nothing without the people. People should always be accountable for this technology and for its use. But I think what we see at BT is this age of a new partnership between AI and people. And I think the organisations that succeed in this are going to be the ones that make the most of that partnership and understand how to optimise that partnership going forward. So thinking about what this means, these kind of new developments and wrapping these up, I think there are several areas we're thinking about it in BT, and I think we see opportunities for other organisations. So we can reshape a number of things. We can reimagine a number of things. So firstly, we can reimagine the way that we acquire customers, so our sales process. So already we're looking to arm salespeople with more information that's relevant to them and to the company they want to talk to. Make sure they've got that information in the form that suits them, and they can have the best conversations possible with those organisations. So hopefully it's beneficial to the salespeople, but also beneficial to those organisations who get a much more relevant experience to them. So that's one way we can do it. When we're engaging with consumers, again, we can think about that personalisation and make sure that we are presenting customers much more with what they might want to see at that given time and how they want to see it. We can also reimagine and reshape our service experience. So when I said before, having networks that can automatically spot anomalies and do something about them, I hope that means that actually fewer calls coming into our organisation are about faults or issues, much more about, okay, what new products and services do you have? How can you meet my emerging needs? And having much more engaging conversations on that level. And having service teams who can see the information, can present that information in the best way possible, I think will help for everyone. The colleague experience, I mentioned that before with these kind of headless apps and being able to not worry about which system you need to query. I think we're going to see a lot more benefits for the colleague experience. Again, not having to write emails from scratch, not having to write the minutes of meetings necessarily, or you're checking the minutes of meetings, one hopes. Capturing actions from meetings, being able to put slide decks together, which is the bane of my life, notwithstanding this one. But all these kinds of tasks we undertake day to day that actually, once you've had the idea, are not that much value adding on top of it. So having the machine take off some of that burden for you would be super helpful. And in operations, I've mentioned before, looking to improve the way we speed up the way we produce marketing or software code, all kinds of things, using AI techniques like we have done previously to continue to optimize how we work and what we do. And what that means for the maritime sector, I think, is going to be really interesting. So going back, I think we see lots of similarities around, with sales. Who are the stakeholders that you're engaging? What does that mean? Okay, it may not be same as BT necessarily, but still, you'll have your customers. For service, what does that mean for the products and services that you're offering to your customers as well? How are they going to be engaging? If you're going to be using AI much more to spot issues, what does that mean for the interactions that you're going to have around service? People, again, very similar across all organisations. I would suggest we've all got emails to write, we've all got slide decks to put together, etc. So I think the same things apply there. And operations, again, nothing particularly, well, to my knowledge, there may be something special about maritime, but I would suggest actually we have very similar challenges and opportunities. Some things to think about some of this new technology, and this is where I kind of feel a bit more like a nerd, but I think these are some messages I've given to our exec as well to make sure they're being very mindful of the power of these new developments, but also some of the big considerations, right? So first of all, Gen AI, people talk about ChatGPT as it knows what I want, it knows this, it knows that. It doesn't know anything, right? It is using statistical associations between words or bits of images to generate content, right? It doesn't understand what they mean. It doesn't understand the relationships between them. It doesn't know anything. However, there are AI techniques that have been around for some time and have continued to be developed that do have knowledge representation, that can be, perhaps, we don't want to get a philosophical debate, perhaps they don't know anything, but they can represent knowledge and they can link between words, they can link between elements of an image. And I think we're going to see much more about those techniques in combination, which means that we'll have powerful techniques that can generate content, but also techniques that can check that that content is accurate, not just plausible looking. The second area is around, Gen AI is not special in regard, it's another AI technique, it's another tool in our toolbox. It relies on data just as much as any other AI technique. Without data, it cannot function. It happens to rely on huge amounts of data, so there are questions there about what that means. For many of us in AI, we've been concerned about bias in data for some time, and it definitely applies in Gen AI. A lot of these tools that we talk about that get the media attention, they rely on a very Western part of the world, they're scraping the internet effectively with all its beauty. To kind of understand and develop models based on those statistical associations it sees between words. So that's going to have bias in it. Okay, we can't avoid that necessarily if we're looking at these vast sets of information. We should be aware of that, and we should be looking at techniques and approaches that help us to mitigate those biases, or at the very least have that human in the loop at the right place at the right time to ensure that biases do not lead to harm. So that's where that partnership between people and machines definitely comes in. the area on the top right, it's much less about the ridiculous number of parameters that some of these models have within them. So we're talking billions of parameters. That's very impressive, and it goes back to what was said earlier about the power of compute and how that has increased over time. That's enabled the scale of these things to be developed. My point here is more for companies like BT and those in the maritime sector is cost. That represents a huge investment. These huge models have been developed with a lot of time, a lot of money, very impressive, but those costs are going to have to be recouped somehow. And there's quite a lot of uncertainty at the moment about how much these technologies are going to cost on the ground. A lot of them will be embedded in tools and software that we will all buy as part of our jobs. But how much do these technologies give us, and how much do they cost over time? I think that's something we all need to be thinking about. Difficult to build a business case for adopting this kind of technology if the cost side is actually very uncertain. And the fourth point comes as a surprise to many people is, broadly speaking, these technologies are statistical engines, effectively. They're exploiting statistical associations between words and things. But there is some subjectivity at play here. It's not just fancy maths. There are people involved here in either kind of labeling some of the data used for training these models, or for kind of prompting or nudging the models to perform in a certain way, potentially in the reinforcement learning area, not to get too nerdy. So whose values are they operating with? And are they being paid enough? Often they're not in the UK, they're elsewhere. Are they being paid enough? So there are all sorts of other things we ought to think about the AI supply chain. There's big tech, but there's a much broader ecosystem at play here, and I think we all should be aware of that and make sure that we understand that. So some takeaways before we move to the panel. Firstly, there are lots of ways these latest developments are going to help organisations. I think it's not just a case of using them to predict patterns, to spot anomalies, as we have done previously, but to actually generate forms of content that can help us to reimagine, reshape the way we interact with ourselves, with our customers, with our colleagues, etc. So new products and services, with 5G, with IoT coming to the fore, what does that mean? What data does that give us? And what does that mean for what we might be able to offer to the industry? The second way is, we are going to see people changing what they expect of companies, of organisations more broadly. They are going to expect more personalisation. They're going to expect that the person on the other end is going to know about the call. They're going to know your context before you have to explain it. I think colleagues are going to expect to be able to retrieve information much more easily than they can do now. And so that's going to lead to lots of new ways of engaging and potentially new forms of need coming out. Can we use AI and other means to spot those needs and to serve them with new products and services? And thirdly, I think a lot of this value is going to be around that partnership between people and AI, or people and machines, not just the technology itself. We know that to be true already. It relies on data. It relies on people to develop and operate that. Also relies on changing culture, making sure that you can embed technology well within your organisation to get the most value from it. So I think that's what we need to be thinking about. We shouldn't be talking about an AI revolution. We should be talking about an AI and people revolution.